There is quite possibly nothing more tedious and frustrating than bleeding your brakes, particularly solo. Who am I kidding? Carbs are far worse, but the runner-up for many people is actually quite a simple job, provided you have a few convenient tools. It's Wednesday here on the ThePirateRagnar MotoVlog channel. This will be a quick one, so let's dive right in. Bleeding brake lines is a pretty simple concept in general, and the primary rule of thumb is keep the air out. The reason you have to bleed your brakes is typically one of two things: either debris or old brake fluid clogging things up, or you have air seeping into the line somewhere. When your brakes feel a little spongy, but you know the pads and the rotors are in good condition, then this is your first step to recovery. After opening the brake fluid reservoir, the process is as follows. Open the brake bleed valve, and hopefully you have a proper bleeder plug. But many of these older bikes don't actually come with them originally, so pick yourself up a few right now. With a bleeder plug, unseating the plug just slightly will open the plug up and brake fluid can seep out. Then when you compress the brake lever, instead of extending the piston inside the caliper, brake fluid will just squirt out of the bleeder valve. So some additional tubing is seriously suggested here to ensure that the brake fluid goes into a container for collection. Please remember, this stuff is seriously corrosive and nasty. Always use gloves when you're working with your brakes. From the pads to the fluid, honestly, nothing is good for you, or for your paint. Now, here is the important bit. This is really the only part that makes this job sometimes tricky. If that brake lever and caliper were right next to each other, this wouldn't be as much of an issue, but it's typically just over an arm's length away. So this is where you have a choice of a few different tools. But first, the essentials: gloves, some tubing, wrench, screwdriver, brake fluid, and a container. All three options are going to require these, so go ahead and get your hands on them. Optional tool number 1, some sort of strap or clamp. This way can be a bit time consuming, but you indeed can get the job done solo without any additional specialty tools. Tedious and time consuming though is really an understatement, as you'll need to repeat this many times. First, compress the brake, then use the strap or clamp to secure the lever in place. Now you can move down to the caliper, and with the hose in place, unseat the bleeder plug. Immediately reseat the bleeder plug, return to the handlebars, release the strap and clamp to release the lever, and then repeat, continually checking the fluid reservoir's level to ensure that you don't end up sucking any air in through the top of the system. You'll be here for a bit. If you can MacGyver some way to compress the lever from your seated position, all the better, but just remember, the one time that messes up, you're gonna have to start over. When air gets sucked into the caliper, it, being air and a fluid, will immediately move up the line somewhere. You'll be back to bleeding all the fluid. Optional tool number 2, some sort of extra hands. Typically a nice, helpful person, but just take what you can get. I used to have a great neighbor, Bob, always eager to help, as you can imagine, but deaf as a doorknob. So it did make coordinating some of these types of tasks a little bit more tricky, but it can be done. With a second set of hands, you have someone that can man the handlebars, so all the lever action is controlled. Another person can park up next to the caliper, and provided you two can cobble together some semblance of communication, handlebar squeezes the lever and holds it, caliper unseats the plug and drains it. Once the plug is fully seated again, caliper communicates this to handlebars, and the process repeats, releasing the lever and squeezing it again. In addition, for front brakes, handlebar can monitor the reservoir, and rear brakes can typically be seen more easily by the caliper attendee. So that makes a painful job far easier. But this can actually be done even more easily, and solo. So now, time for optional tool number 3. And honestly, I can't suggest this one enough, having done all of the above far too many times. A one-way valve built just for this purpose, and something that costs a fraction of what it used to. This one, for example, cost me about $5 online. With a one-way valve in place, you can unseat the plug and just leave the caliper alone for now, moving back to the handlebars, where you can monitor the reservoir so you can just squeeze and release your way to some freshly bled brakes. and that's it. Something that can be actually quite tricky if you're going into this blind is actually a very simple process, and with the right tools, easy as pie. Wait, babe, is pie easy to make? As always, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like the content that you're seeing on the channel, do me a solid and slap that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. It really, really helps the algorithm, that hungry YouTube algorithm. Remember, ride safe and ride fun, and I will see you on the next video.